She told them to leave me, in front of everyone, and no one did anything. Not until the fire captain showed up. I could feel my chest tightening. The air was thick with panic as I gasped for breath, struggling to stay conscious. Everything around me seemed distant, muffled. I couldn't hear the paramedics clearly, but I could see their frantic movements, their eyes filled with concern. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I had just made breakfast for myself, just like any other morning. But today, my body had decided otherwise. As I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, everything spiraled into chaos. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. I'm Evelyn, a 72-year-old widow, and until recently, I had always managed just fine on my own. But lately, my health had been getting worse. I thought maybe it was just age catching up with me, or perhaps a passing sickness. But now, as I lay there, gasping for air, it felt like something more serious. The paramedics arrived quickly, rushing into my house, their voices a blur as they started assessing me. I didn't know if I was going to make it. Panic set in, and I couldn't seem to catch my breath. The oxygen mask was right there, in their hands, ready to help me breathe. I could see them looking at each other, probably wondering why they hadn't already placed it on me. But then there was Julie, my daughter-in-law, who came into the room. She didn't rush to my side. She didn't even look concerned. Instead, she stood by the door, arms crossed, watching as the paramedics tried to help me. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. I could see her lips move as she said something to the paramedics. It didn't make sense. Was she telling them to leave me? "She's fine. Leave her," she said. Leave me? Her words hit me harder than I expected. I couldn't understand it. Why was she so cold? Why was she not trying to help me? It felt like I was being abandoned, not just by my body, but by the very people I thought I could trust. And then, as if to add salt to the wound, she took the oxygen mask off my face. The paramedics froze, eyes wide in shock. My heart raced faster, my breath growing more shallow by the second. "Leave her," Julie repeated, her voice calm. Her words rang out, echoing in the room. I felt like I was suffocating, not just from the lack of oxygen, but from the disbelief that someone I loved could be so heartless. I tried to speak again, but no sound came out. And then, just when I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, the fire captain arrived. He didn't hesitate for a second. He took one look at the scene, and the entire room shifted. "Step back, now." His voice was steady, but there was a fire in his eyes I hadn't seen before. The fire captain, Captain Mason, was in his mid-40s, his face stern but compassionate, his uniform crisp with the weight of authority. He wasn't someone who looked like he could be easily intimidated, and it was clear he wasn't about to let Julie, or anyone else, stand in the way of saving my life. The room felt like it was holding its breath. I could still barely breathe, my chest aching with each shallow gasp, but somehow, Captain Mason's presence calmed me, even as everything seemed to spin around me. I've known Julie for years. She's been married to my son Darren for over a decade. And honestly, I've always tried to get along with her, even though something about her always rubbed me the wrong way. She was never one to show much emotion, always businesslike, always practical. I used to joke that she was a little too by the book, but I never imagined her being so cold, especially in a situation like this. Julie had never been a fan of my independent lifestyle. Over the years, she'd made it clear that she thought I should move into a retirement home, that it would be easier for everyone. But I didn't want to. I didn't want to be a burden on anyone. I still had a lot to give, a lot of love to share. But now, it felt like Julie had already made up her mind about my fate. I couldn't help but wonder if this was all part of her plan. Maybe, just maybe, She thought I was better off gone. It was a cruel thought, but at that moment, it was the only one that made sense. As the paramedics scrambled to regain control of the situation, I saw Julie's face, impassive, detached. She wasn't concerned. She wasn't even upset. It was like she was waiting for something to happen, and she didn't want to get in the way. She didn't seem to care that her actions were directly putting my life at risk. The more I tried to focus on what was happening around me, the more confused I became. Why would she act like this? I'd always been a part of the family, but lately I felt like I was just an inconvenience, something to deal with. Captain Mason looked straight at Julie, his expression hardening. "You need to step back," he ordered, taking a step forward. He wasn't asking. He wasn't negotiating. He was taking control. Julie, however, didn't move. She just stood there, staring at him with a coldness that sent a shiver down my spine. I said, "Step back." The tension in the air was palpable. The paramedics were silent, waiting for what would come next. And then, Julie did something unexpected. "What is she doing?" The words escaped my lips before I could stop them. I was barely able to speak, but I couldn't help myself. Julie was standing there, motionless, with an expression that seemed so calm, it almost made me question everything I thought I knew about her. Captain Mason stepped closer to me, his hands already preparing to secure the oxygen mask back onto my face. But before he could act, Julie reached out again, her hand hovering over the mask. It all happened so quickly. In one swift motion, Julie snatched the mask off my face, her fingers gripping it tightly. The oxygen that was supposed to save me, the very thing that could keep me from suffocating, was in her hands now. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. My daughter-in-law was holding my lifeline, and she didn't care one bit. "Julie, what are you doing?" Darren's voice suddenly echoed from the hallway, panic and confusion cutting through the thick tension. He had just walked in, and he was already too late. I could feel the dizziness setting in again, my vision swimming in and out of focus. The fear creeping back in was unbearable. Julie didn't respond to Darren. She didn't even flinch. Instead, her eyes locked on Captain Mason's, unblinking, unwavering. "She's fine. She doesn't need that," she said, her voice so cold, so detached, that it made me feel like I wasn't even there. I was just an object to be dealt with. Darren rushed to my side, his face a mix of disbelief and anger. "Julie, what the hell are you doing?" he demanded, his voice rising. "This is my mother. She can't breathe. You need to let them help her." Julie didn't answer him. She just stood there, silent and still, holding the mask as if it meant nothing at all. I could see it now. The truth I had been too scared to acknowledge for so long. Julie had never cared for me the way I thought. Over the years, I'd noticed the subtle hints, the way she always suggested I sell my house, the way she was so insistent that I should live in a care facility, even though I had made it clear I wasn't ready for that. But this was different. Julie had been trying to push me out of the picture for a long time. She didn't want me around anymore. And now, in her mind, she had a reason, a sickening justification. I wasn't just a burden, I was an obstacle. And she wasn't going to let something like my life get in the way of whatever plans she had. "Julie, stop!" Darren shouted, his voice breaking through the tension. But it was too late. The paramedics were paralyzed with indecision. Captain Mason's face was hardening, but he wasn't moving fast enough. And just then, the room seemed to shift. A voice from behind them, calm but firm, cut through the chaos. "Step aside, Julie." It was Captain Mason, and what he said next would change everything. "Step aside, Julie." His voice was calm, but I could hear the authority in it, like the steady calm before a storm. I had never seen anyone challenge Julie like this before. For as long as I'd known her, she had always controlled the room. She was always the one with the last word, the one who decided things, especially when it came to family matters. But Captain Mason wasn't intimidated. He was standing there, towering over her, demanding she back down. And for the first time, I saw Julie hesitate. For a split second, I thought she might finally listen. But instead, she stood even taller, refusing to move. I was trapped in the middle of it all, fighting for air while this strange battle unfolded before me. My heart was pounding in my chest, my lungs begging for oxygen. Captain Mason didn't budge. His eyes were locked on Julie's, but his focus quickly shifted to me. "We need to get this mask back on her, now." Darren, finally realizing the severity of the situation, rushed to my side, looking between Julie and Captain Mason. His hands were shaking as he held my shoulder, trying to comfort me while his eyes flicked between the two of them. "Julie, please, what's wrong with you?" he asked, his voice breaking with emotion. He was no longer the calm, collected man I knew. His mother's life was in danger, and Julie was standing in the way. Julie didn't respond, not even when Captain Mason stepped closer to me, carefully placing the oxygen mask back over my face. The instant the oxygen hit my lungs, I felt a sharp relief, but it wasn't enough to calm the storm inside me. I was angry, but even more so, I was scared. I could see Darren's face crumbling, and I knew he had finally seen the side of Julie that I had been afraid to acknowledge for years. The room was heavy with tension, the air thick with the realization that something irreparable was happening. Darren turned on Julie, his voice now low but filled with disbelief. "What the hell were you thinking? She could have died." Julie stood there, her face still cold, but there was something different about her now. A crack in her armor. She wasn't as confident as she had been. It was as if the weight of her own actions had finally hit her. Or maybe it hadn't. I couldn't tell. Captain Mason moved forward with the paramedics, making sure I was stable before turning to face Julie. "You're not in charge here," he said, his voice unwavering. "If you interfere again, I'll call the authorities." Julie finally stepped back, the mask in her hands, her lips pressed tightly together. Her body language screamed resistance, but the truth was clear. She had lost control. The fire captain had taken charge of the situation, and in doing so, he'd saved my life. But this was far from over. Darren's expression was a mixture of disbelief and anger. But it wasn't just at Julie anymore. It was at himself, too, for not seeing what was right in front of him. He had trusted his wife, and now everything was changing. Julie wasn't the person I thought she was, and that truth wasn't going to be easy to accept. As Captain Mason helped stabilize me, Darren's voice cut through the tension. "We're going to have to talk about this, all of it." Julie didn't say a word. She just turned and walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The air felt different now, heavy with the weight of what had just happened and the truth that had come to light. But the questions remained. What would Darren do next? What did this mean for our family? The oxygen finally began to settle my frantic breathing. It wasn't a cure, but it gave me the relief I desperately needed. I slowly started to regain my composure, my mind still trying to process everything that had just happened. I could hear Captain Mason in the background giving the paramedics instructions to make sure I was stable, while Darren stood there looking lost. It was hard to focus on anything except the oxygen that now filled my lungs, but in the quiet moments that followed, a chilling realization settled over me. My daughter-in-law had almost let me die. The paramedics wrapped up their work, ensuring I was okay for transport, but the emotional weight lingered. Darren hadn't spoken a word to Julie since her departure from the room. The silence between us was heavy. It wasn't just the shock of what Julie had done, it was the fact that Darren had finally seen the truth. Julie wasn't the caring, practical woman he had believed her to be. She had just tried to take my life away. And for what? Control? Convenience? Darren turned to me finally, his eyes filled with guilt. "Mum, I don't know what to say." I shook my head, still unable to speak properly, but my eyes were clear. Clear with the understanding that something had broken in our family, and it wouldn't be the same again. As I was transported to the hospital, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of gratitude. Not just for the oxygen that had saved my life, but for the fire captain who had stood up when no one else would. He had done more than just help me breathe. He had given me back a sense of dignity, a sense of being heard. As the paramedics wheeled me down the hallway, I looked over at Darren, who walked beside me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. The disappointment was still there, but his face showed something else now. Resolve. He wasn't going to let Julie get away with what she had done. Not again. When we arrived at the hospital, the doctors ran some tests, but it was clear that I had dodged a bullet that could have been fatal. Julie's cold actions had nearly cost me my life, but the emotional cost was even greater. Darren, for the first time, understood the depth of Julie's disregard for family. He knew now that he couldn't just stand by and pretend it was all fine. The fallout didn't happen immediately. Darren, heartbroken and angry, had to make a choice. He sat down with Julie later that day, and the confrontation was brutal. He made it clear that he would not tolerate her behaviour any longer, that what she had done was unforgivable, and it would have consequences. Julie didn't fight back. She didn't try to justify her actions. She simply stood there, silent. In the end, Darren made the decision that many would find hard. He moved out of the house he had shared with Julie. The trust was shattered. As the days passed and my condition improved, I found a new strength I didn't know I had. I wasn't just fighting to breathe anymore. I was fighting to reclaim my life, my independence, my family, and my dignity. The days of me feeling like a burden, like I didn't matter, were gone. I wasn't going to live my remaining years like that. When Darren came to visit me in the hospital, he apologised over and over. But I wasn't angry with him. He had been blind, but now he saw the truth. And in that truth, we both realised that while the family had been fractured, there was still hope. The person who had nearly killed me wasn't the woman I had once accepted as family. And now, with that truth revealed, I felt lighter. I was finally free to make my own choices. I looked at Darren one more time, feeling the quiet comfort of knowing that we were both going to be okay. As I watched him leave the hospital room, I took a deep breath. This time, not because I had to, but because I finally could. The air around me felt clearer, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again.